Well, for the last few weeks, we have been exploring this renewed mission for Good Shepherd, that God is calling us to connect people to true abundance in Christ, which we've explored is not at all how the world defines abundance. It's not about what we earn, achieve, accumulate. It's not wrapped up in our successes or failures, but true abundance, we've explored, is having a depth of faith, of community, of hope, taking big steps, following Jesus. And this week we wrap that series up, exploring what it means to embrace bold generosity, to share freely everything that God has given us, recognizing that we own nothing. We are stewards of what God has given us. We're called to caretake what God has placed into our trust for the glory of God and the healing of the world. But it's also All Saints Weekend. I mentioned earlier, this is a really important weekend that we celebrate once a year, where we remember both those that were baptized into the faith this year in this community, as well as those that have passed on to life eternal, those that have died in the faith. And I was struggling all week trying to reconcile these two things. Commitment Sunday, preaching about generosity, trying to encourage you to make those commitments for 2025 so that we can go into the new year with our renewed mission, with strength and energy and purpose to accomplish everything God needs, right? A rallying cry. But here's the thing. I've experienced Good Shepherd, and you to be nothing short of generous, of faithful, and I believe, I trust that you are in. You get it. You get it with the way you serve. You get it with how you share your resources, and I trust that moving into 2025, God will do more through us than we can even imagine right now. But as I was thinking about all saints and those that have gone on in the faith, those have died, and thinking about this theme of generosity, this week as I was sort of blowing some leaves in my front yard and raking some leaves, I started thinking about a saint who passed away when I was just a child. It's somebody that, unfortunately, I didn't get to know throughout most of my life. I have never had the pleasure of having an adult relationship with this person, but I've often wondered what that would have been like. It was my grandpa George, my dad's dad. He passed away when I was just in elementary school, a little boy. But over the years, my dad has told me that my grandpa would have been so proud of the man that I had become. My dad often says that he sees a lot of his dad in me. And I have these memories, only a handful of them, from when I was about 5 or 6 years old, of piling in my dad's Ford Explorer on an early Saturday morning and loading the hunting rifles in the back, and my Davy Crockett fake rifle with the little orange cap on the front. And my mom would dress me in my buckskin outfit that she had sewn, and I'd wear my coonskin cap. I was obsessed with Davy Crockett as a little boy. We rented that movie so many times from Hollywood Video that one Christmas they gave it to our family because we were the only ones who rented it. And I have these memories of riding with my dad down to the country where my grandpa lived, and from a very early age, I understood that my grandpa George was poor. He didn't have a lot of resources in a worldly sense. He and his 3 brothers had all served in World War II. 4 boys from Cambridge, Ohio, coming of age during the Second Great War, and 2 of them, my grandfather included, would serve in Europe, and 2 would serve in the Pacific. Can you imagine their mom's anxiety and stress? Thankfully, my grandpa was one of the brothers that came home. They didn't all make it home. And when my grandfather came back from the war, he settled in and worked at a factory. He didn't make a whole lot of money. The house that he lived in was the house that he raised my dad and his two brothers and sister in, and was modest at best. And so many of those early memories are coming out of the car and grabbing that fake rifle and running up to my grandfather's doorstep, and him slowly getting up, and you could hear his footsteps on that hardwood floor creaking as he'd come to that little screen door, and he'd have these open, big arms. He smelled like chewing tobacco, and he'd wrap me up, and he always had a pouch of Red Man, and actually one time he let me try it. I was like 6 years old. My dad and Uncle Terry went off squirrel hunting, and I just hung out with my grandpa in his house. He didn't feel like walking in the woods, and I was enamored. It looked like, remember the baseball fake chewing gum, that fake, Big League Chew? It looked like that, and I was, Grandpa, can I try that? And he had this twinkle in his eye. Yeah, you want to? And he put a little bit in my mouth, and bleh, it was so disgusting. He laughed. But so many of those moments with this man, what I remember after walking in the woods with my dad and uncle and grandpa, we'd come back into his house, and he would go to the kitchen and get on a step stool, and like out of a Norman Rockwell movie, he'd open a cabinet, and he would pull down a coffee can where he had stocked a few dollars in, and he had saved from his pension check to drive me down to Orr's Diner and buy me an ice cream cone. Very humble, very meager, but extremely generous. You know what it's like when somebody passes away and you didn't really get to know them that well, and they almost become like a mythological creature in your mind. You sort of idolize them. I have no doubt that my grandfather was a complicated man. There was good attributes to him, and I'm sure there were ones that were bad, but I'll never forget the way he made me feel. Loved, seen, appreciated. And my favorite memory, the strongest memory I have, is on one Saturday when we had driven down. My Uncle Terry was going to meet us, and my dad and Uncle Terry really wanted to pheasant hunt, and so they were ambitious for the day, and I'm too little to do that, but Grandpa decided to take me in the woods and walk together, and my dad and uncle went on ahead, and my grandpa came to this big tree, and he said, "Lorne, do you want to carve your initials in it?" I've never done that, and yeah, Grandpa, of course. And he pulls out this pocket knife, and he begins carving his initials, and then he's helping me do an L, and he's holding the knife, but I'm holding it with him, and we slip, and the knife goes into my hand, cuts it a little bit. He pulled out that red handkerchief, and like a grandpa has, and wrapped it around my hand, and I was worried and freaked out as a little kid, but my grandpa was so calm, and he invited me to sit down with him underneath this big tree, his back against it and my back against his, and my greatest memory of my grandfather is sitting under that tree with his arms wrapped around me, holding that handkerchief and holding my hand and applying pressure. And as I was reading this text this week, this is what jogged my memory. The eye is the lamp of the body, and if the eye is healthy, the whole body will be healthy. And as we were sitting under that tree, and he was holding my hand and helping me through this moment of temporary pain, he kept drawing my vision toward the birds that were flying in the distance. Lauren, do you see those birds? And do you see that's a maple tree? And why don't you watch as those leaves fall? And let's look for a gray-tailed squirrel and see if they're jumping from limb to limb. Do you think your dad and uncle are going to get any pheasants today? No. And as we sat there, and he directed my vision toward the beauty that was all around me, that pain wasn't so unbearable. My grandpa didn't have tons of resources to share. He certainly no trust fund for his children or grandchildren. He gave what he had, which was himself. And it's always been more than enough. This week, as we turn our attention to embracing bold generosity, I want you to think of those people in your life that have modeled a heart of service and giving, of love and sharing for you. And as we go through the rest of worship, I want you to find one of these lights, one of these candles, and I want your sight to be fixed on it. Because sometimes in life, things feel pretty dim and dark. Sometimes in life, we're overwhelmed and we're uncertain. But even in the darkest moments, there's light. And God is always inviting us to draw our vision toward that light. 16 lives this year from this community that have passed on to life eternal. Not to mention those in your life, your family members, your friends, your loved ones that have gone on to church eternal. And yet at the same time, we have these 4 bright lights of those newly baptized, those that are just beginning this adventure in the Christian faith. All Saints is this paradox of sorts where we long for and we grieve and we mourn those that have gone on before us, not just this year, but throughout our lives. But we hold that in the tension of the joy of those that are coming into the faith. And then there's the Christ candle over here by our font. We only light this a few times a year and at every baptism, but we light it on All Saints because this candle for us represents the light of Christ. And we know and we trust that it's Christ's light that is the source of any light we can offer this world. We can't manufacture the light. We simply can reflect the light that Jesus is shining into our lives, and we become a conduit for that light out into the world. And as we reflect on these lights, on this gift of saints gone before, I want us all to pray and to ask God how, in this new year, in 2025 and beyond, we can help share that light. Yes, through our resources, but through so much more. Through our love, through our service, through trusting God in the midst of the unknown, and believing firmly that God goes before us, God goes with us, and that just like a loving grandfather with his 6-year-old grandson, God's arms are wrapped around you underneath a big oak tree, and he's holding your wounds tightly. And he is drawing your attention beyond the horizon, where every tear is wiped away, where mourning and pain will be no more. Amen.